Hello and welcome to the second episode of Steve and Dave's 100 Best Singles of All Time. Last time we said that we were doing this in no particular order, and then we started off with arguably the best single of all time. Um, but in this case, we're really I have no place. I have no idea where I would put this in the top 100. It's somewhere in there, but it's not number two. It's just
No, it's not number two.
the object of our second episode, and
Yeah,
that
so
is
yeah.
Steve. Where are we going to?
Well, it's Rod Stewart's Reason to Believe, Maggie May, and this comes to
1971.
us in 71. Yeah, this is Rod Stewart's first big single,
Breakout
solo
single.
single.
Yeah.
And it captures, I think, but from my perspective, both sides of Rod Stewart, the artist. He's the great interpreter. I mean, he's the incredible voice, and over his career, he's reshaped tunes penned by others. And Rod Stewart is also, I think, a terrific writer, and I think you get a flavor of both those things here with this single, the A side, the B side,
Yeah.
and remarkably, the A side in 71 was Reason to Believe.
Yeah. Well, that didn't last too long, but it was enough for the single to enter the Hot 100 chart. I think Reason to Believe peaked at like 67 in the Hot 100 before Maggie May took over.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it Reason to Believe was penned by the star-crossed Tim Hardin, right? Oh, geez.
Well, an extremely talented singer-songwriter by all accounts, but also, as is so often, I mean, it's a story that we see again and again in the world of rock and pop. Someone who is destroyed by his own demons.
That's right. That's right.
During his entire creative period, he was a heroin addict, and that ended up killing him. I think he was 39 when he died in sometime in the 80s.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
was planning a comeback. Had a comeback album already. Was recording and died of an accidental overdose.
It's a horrendous, horrendously sad tale. I think though that Hardin he was well known by songwriters. He had a certain kind of magic, and his songwriting was really, it was, even during his difficult and turbulent life, he was perceived as a kind of songwriter. I think for most people, the two Hardin songs of note would be, again, this one, Reason to Believe, and then If I Was a Carpenter.
And his songs were just covered by nearly everyone.
Yeah. And this was true even in his lifetime, right? And so yeah, so this is a picture of Hardin. Hardin, of course, he appeared at Woodstock, but he didn't appear in the film or the original soundtrack album. So in a way, he kind of didn't appear at Woodstock. And so one can imagine that Hardin could have gotten an enormous boost had he appeared in the film. But so he kind of bubbled under the surface, I think, for his entire career. And
well, part of his problem as a performer was, first of all, almost debilitating stage fright.
That's a big problem.
And,
yeah.
And the second thing was just he was a goddamn heroin addict, and that often showed on stage, is that he was just not quite all there, and so that makes a difference too. Interesting. His this Reason to Believe was it's like people were standing in line to cover it, right?
That's
It was on his first album, creatively named Tim Hardin 1.
yeah.
The sequel was
There's a
Tim
pattern
Hardin
there.
2, and I
Yes,
think it went on to Tim Hardin 3, and so on. There was not
and so on. Yeah.
a lot of thought put into that, but he recorded that in 1965 himself. And then Bobby Darin recorded it in 66. The Youngbloods recorded it in 67. Peter, Paul, and Mary and Glenn Campbell recorded it in 1968. Peggy Lee did too. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band in 1969, Carpenters in 1970, and then in 1971, Rod Stewart. And then much later, on their 1990 debut album, the Wilson Phillips.
Right.
So, and that's not everybody. That's just
not right.
Kind of a chronological list of the people
exactly
it was covered. Boom, boom, boom every year. So
I mean, in terms of so give credit where credit is due. And publishing revenues were obviously rolling in, but that probably didn't do him any favors either in this era. And so,
it helped him afford his habit.
I'm afraid that's true. And so you've got Hardin's reason to believe that, as you're suggesting, people are really in line to record. And so this takes us, I think, to Rod Stewart in this era, right? Who is it's a transitional moment for him.
Well, he's working on his solo career and working on his work with the Faces, kind of parallel, right?
Kind of parallel. That's exactly.
And I think you see that as much in if you take a look at the players on these two songs on this single. It was like half of the Faces were involved in his solo project.
Oh, that's exactly right. I think on this album, Every Picture Tells a Story. I think maybe all the Faces make appearance at some point or another. It's so Rod Stewart, of course, then becomes, I think, well known to listeners as working with Jeff Beck on Jeff Beck's first two solo albums, the Jeff Beck Group, after Beck leaves the Yardbirds. From there, then he transitions, like you're saying, to the Faces. The Faces themselves are in the throes of having lost their lead man, Steve Marriott. So they were the small Faces, and they transitioned to the Faces when Ronnie Wood and Rod Stewart joined. The Faces.
Both of them fresh from Jeff Beck, right?
I think. Well,
Mickey Waller on drums went from Jeff Beck straight to the Faces.
There we go. It's well, wait a minute. Kenny Wood was
sorry. Mickey Waller went straight from the Jeff Beck group to working with Rod on his solo career. He played on both of these.
Yes.
Both of the songs.
That's
on
right.
Single.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's the Faces were no band ever had more fun than the Faces, and they were, oh my God. I mean, the stories are legendary, but it's clear that Stewart's time in the Faces was going to be it's going to be a short stay, and it was almost from the moment he joined the band he kind of eclipsed the other members. And so there's this odd period, right, in 70, 71, where the Faces are essentially kind of serving as a backup band.
Yeah.
And it's an odd deal, to say the least. But so Stewart is making his way out of the Faces and into a solo career. And so this is I think this is an interesting choice for a lead single. It's, I don't know. It just seems a little odd to me, but.
Well, what now? Reason to Believe as the A-side, or?
Well, I think there would be other choices on this album actually, but for me, again, it's Reason to Believe as the A-side. So I mean, this is the quandary, and for a long time, I was surprised when I learned that, in fact, that years ago, that this was, in fact, the song that was presented as the sort of this is the Rod Stewart. And so stations across the United States played it, but then DJs began to flip the the song over, right? The record over,
And
as
to
was, you know,
discover the treasure on the other side.
yeah, and the treasure on the other side was it was real treasure, and so reason to believe. So there is well, what makes reason to believe then part of this
Well,
pantheon, do you think?
let me just make a correction. I think
Okay.
I said it made it to 67 on the Hot 100. It made it to 62 before Maggie May took over. And it made it to number 19 on the UK on its own before Maggie May took over.
Yeah, and so
Um,
right, and so as a kind of opening salvo to Rod Stewart's career, I mean, it is, you know, okay, it's okay. It's
yeah.
what is so this song it is, I think, special to many. I it's a little syrupy for me, but those people who love it, I mean, they find it, well,
Well, this isn't any more syrupy
it's
than anything else he was doing at the time. I don't think. I think it's just. I think
I
it's
think it
just.
bordered, okay, well, I
Uh,
think it's saccharine actually, but it's okay. I'm
well,
I'm
you know,
a
one of the things I think one of the things that saves it for me is that really interesting break in the middle.
agreed. Yeah, that is
They just
interesting.
where it just fades and then stops completely. And it turns out, well, Stewart talks about this in the his 1989 Storyteller compilation. He wrote, quote, a very lucid upright bass, played by Spike Healy, and a beautiful guitar played by Martin Quintenton
Mhm.
create an almost ethereal quality. Nevertheless, there was one big cock up in the middle where everybody stops playing for no apparent reason. It was just it was just a mess up. Signals got crossed and they just stopped. It was not
And
planned. It just happened.
well, and so so you leave it. That's the
Yeah,
interesting thing, right? I mean,
yeah,
this speaks to the more organic quality of recording in this era. That things happen in the studio. Things like this happen with some frequency, and oftentimes they remained on the record.
yes. And oftentimes it's one of the things that makes the song really interesting. So
Sure,
uh,
sure, yeah,
I think for the most part, we had the same players on both
yeah.
sides of the signal, right? You had
That's right.
Stewart on vocals, Ron Wood on guitar, Martin Quintenton also on guitar. He had been asked to join the Faces. Rod Stewart asked him to, um, but he felt like their lifestyle was maybe not the right
Oh,
one for him.
it's. Do you know that they would deliver cases of alcohol to the crowd, and so everybody would be lit up, and then they literally were the band then and would invite the crowd to the hotel, and they would, or to the pub, and so right, so the lifestyle, yeah, yeah, it would be a challenge,
It had Ian McLagan on
right?
organ, Pete Sears on piano for Reason to Believe. He actually played the Celesta or bell piano on Maggie May.
Mhm.
You know anything about that?
No, I mean, I don't know anything about that instrument particularly. No.
It's um, just to give you an idea. This is the dominant instrument in Tchaikovsky's Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. Ding 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 ding
Oh
ding
yeah,
ding
yeah,
ding ding ding.
yeah.
That's the
That's
Celesta.
right. Sure.
Um, anyway, had Mick Weller on the drums, Spike Healy on the upright bass, and Dick Powell on violin. Um,
Oh, on
there was
mandolin.
no upright bass. There was no violin on Maggie
Can we go
May,
back?
but
Yeah.
otherwise,
Yeah. Right.
yeah.
Okay, that's right. I misspoke. Yeah, that's right. I was thinking of the mandolin on Maggie May, which is There's
This
a
was
kind of
Ray
story.
Jackson.
Yeah.
Although on the album, mandolin
This is so
listed as
unbelievable.
quote, the mandolin was played by the mandolin player in Lindisfarne. The name slips my mind, end quote.
Well, this is yeah. So this is quite notorious. And Jackson held on, and he was angry about this for a long time, and I think even sued for publishing at some point. There was at least a lawsuit of some sort.
Yeah, just about that, about his lawsuit. He said, quote, I'm convinced that my contribution to Maggie May, which occurred in the early stages of my career when I was just becoming famous for my work with Lindisfarne, was essential to the success of the record. Furthermore, a writing credit would have given me a writing status, which would have encouraged my writing efforts and could well have opened doors for me, end quote.
I think that he's probably right.
It's hard to argue with that, right?
Yeah,
because I mean, seriously, it's the mandolin, especially the last minute and a half of this song. The mandolin is what really makes it. It really makes this song stand out.
It absolutely does. And again, so I don't know how liner notes and all of that were produced. It seems as though sometimes there's a little slapdash, haphazard. And I guess what might have seemed funny in 1971 over time, anyway, you just need somebody to step in and say,
well, the guy
put
was
the guy's
paid
name in.
£15 for the session,
which was standard.
This sort of thing happened all the time, right?
It happened all the time.
Players, they were all doing some of the composition because they were pretty much asked to just play what they thought would be good, right? I mean,
that's right.
They often did not have charts or anything like that. But it's hard to argue that this was particularly relevant bit. He was asked to come up with something for the close, and did a fantastic job. I don't understand why you just can't say, look, man, whatever, maybe you don't get everything you want, but here's several thousand quid to make up for the fact that you didn't really earn what your work was worth. Something like that.
Well, there are dozens of examples of this, including people like Rick Wakeman, whose contribution on Morning Is Broken, Cat Stevens' wondrous hit, was, similar kind of thing. I mean, it was his contribution was essential, and he essentially was, virtually uncompensated until later. And it was until later.
Think about Sound of Silence. Not Sound of Silence. Sorry, Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Larry Knechtel.
Yeah, Larry Knechtel, and he never even got pissy about it. It was just
that we know. Yeah, you're right.
Just what he did, right? As a session player, was used to.
Well, you're right, but is it so? Knechtel was part of the wrecking crew. He was well established as a session man. I mean, he was part of a legendary session ensemble, if you will. And Parker's just kind of getting started. And so I think it's a different, anyway, it's not exactly apples and oranges, but maybe we should transition to Maggie May, which is, I mean, this is the song. This is the song that made Rod Stewart, I think.
Oh, it's the first time I ever heard Rod Stewart in the radio, and I loved it. I was wild about it from the get-go. So
this is the Rod Stewart that I find most appealing. The more earthy Rod Stewart, the storyteller. There's something about it that is that's timeless, and he's just it's the perfect melding of song and voice. I mean, for me, it's sort of the quintessential Rod Stewart song. I mean, he's had a long career and done many different things, but for me, when I think of Rod Stewart, I mean, I go to Maggie May almost
Oh, me too.
immediately.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
So, so Maggie May is drawn from, as sometimes the best songs are, drawn from personal experience, and this takes us back to a decade earlier.
1961.
He's a young lad, and he's on his way to to a jazz festival.
Beaulieu Jazz Festival.
It's such a, yeah. So so we will include, well, so we should go ahead. So he's a kid. He's with some lads. They sneak in. They sneak into the festival through a sewer pipe or something. I don't know. So they say, to get into this festival, and they're at the watering hole at a tent, right? And he's approached. You probably should take it from there. I might become embarrassed.
Well, all right. I have no scruples. Yeah, it's approached by an older woman who essentially takes him by the hand and takes him to some sort of tent where they could have privacy. And as he says, the deed was done.
Yeah.
And, the deed didn't take very long either, according to his recollections.
That's my, that's the story.
And he never saw her again.
Right. And so a couple things about this. All right. Years later, decades later, a short film emerged of Stewart and his friends at the festival. And so so we will include it in the show notes, but there's about, I think it's 16 seconds worth of film, and Stewart, as a 16-year-old, appears in about 4 or 5 seconds of it. And so he's at the festival, and so he confirmed this decades later that this was in fact him. And so, right, so as this young guy, he has this experience, and it melds, in a way, it sort of melds Rod Stewart's worlds of music and women, and he's off and running. But the song itself is, well, it's, there's a certain compassion to it, but there's also a certain kind of edge to it. It's,
oh yeah,
it's, there's some, you really get a sense of the experience. It's not altogether positive. It's mostly positive from his perspective. There's a lot of back and forth and to and fro there in a relatively short song that's emotionally complex. It's nuanced.
There's certainly an asymmetry to this relationship.
Yeah, that's right.
There's no question about who is in charge, who has the reins. Just one really quick thing. Going back to the jazz festival, he later said, quote, Maggie May was more or less a true story about the first woman I had sex with.
More or less.
All right. I would say less, a lot less. Because what you're talking about at the jazz festival was a wham bam thank you ma'am sort of situation, right? And what we're talking about here is a love affair, which has been going on for more than 3 minutes, right?
Right. And so
this is the crazy. There is a big difference. So there might have been a germ of an idea that was planted there, but
one can imagine that this is the kind of scenario that played out in his head in months, if not years, following, right?
Yes, I think that's a good point.
Right, but there's something about this that is, I think that Stewart, at his best, is someone who, in fact, tells the tale. That Stewart is most effective is when he's embraced folk, when he has a kind of narrative, I think he's extraordinary at that point. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of Rod Stewarts, but I mean, this is perfect from my perspective in terms of Stewart, just perfect.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no question. And as you said, at least for those of us who were appreciating music at that point in time, maybe his signature song.
I think that's fair.
Although it was at the beginning of a very long career, it's hard to think of a song that better defines what he's capable of as an artist.
I think that's absolutely the case. And so once this song was, if you will, kind of discovered by DJs and began to play, it was wildly popular. And in a way that Reason to Believe was at best kind of a middling hit. This thing soared to the top of the charts, really, I think, around the world, certainly in the United States, but globally, this was a big hit. And it really cemented Rod Stewart as a kind of force in popular music. I mean, this album was a big hit, and his solo career just sort of just took off at this point.
It's interesting how many songs in his early career were about the suffering he did at the hands of the women he loved.
Well, yeah. Right.
First Cut Is the Deepest, You Wear It Well, that whole, it's all kind of, the women are in charge, and man, we suffer because of it.
Yeah, that's right. And again, First Cut the Deepest is a classic example is Rod Stewart as an interpreter. That's a Cat Stevens song. It's right. You know, Stewart has a certain kind of magic, and there's it's magnificent. So as a single, I mean, I think some of our singles, as we'll talk about, there's a kind of equal weight to the A side and the B side. That certainly was the case with the first one we talked about, right. Lane Strawberry Fields. There's a certain kind of equality there, but I think it's clearly it's heavily weighted toward Maggie, and I think he revived Reason to Believe later in the Unplugged MTV Unplugged series, and he released that as a single. But I mean, we understand that Maggie May that's a legacy song. And then when we think about Rod Stewart, we'll always think of him. Song.
Yeah, you mentioned early on in the video that you didn't understand why the choice was made to make Reason to Believe the A side.
I mean,
Stewart said in 2015, quote, "At first, I didn't think much of Maggie May. I guess that's because the record company didn't believe in the song. I didn't have much confidence then. I figured it was best to listen to the guys who knew better.
Sure.
What I learned is sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't." End quote.
Well, that's right. And so
you're talking about an A&R guy.
Well, that's right.
Making that decision and being wrong in this particular.
That's right. Being wrong in this case. We should say that Maggie May, that there is a kind of guitar intro. This is the tune Henry. This is Martin Quillian, right? Who
yes,
gets a writing credit. And so sometimes over the years, sometimes Henry has been the guitar intro has been a part of the song, and sometimes it hasn't. In the compilations over the past several decades, it's always included. But the guitar intro taking us into the opening licks again, there's this kind of interesting folk feel, and just real quickly, I think one of the things that makes the song so interesting is that this is
wait a second. You're talking about the UK guitar, like the 30-second guitar intro on the album, right?
That's right.
Okay,
that's right. Yeah, and I think that this time in England, folk music has at its kind of zenith with groups like Lindsay Found, Steel Ice Band, Fairport Convention, and a number of others. And so, I mean, he sort of fits into this tradition. And obviously he took his career a different way, but when he embraces this folk piece, he's magnificent. He's just magnificent. And I wish that he would have stayed closer to this. I really do. The disco Rod Stewart never did much for me.
I'm completely on board with that. Yes. I feel the same way about it. Listen, let's just say real quickly something about the chart success that the single had once Maggie May started getting the airplay.
Right.
It was number one on the Billboard Hot 100 for 5 weeks, all through the month of October, which
that's pretty good in the early 70s. Pretty good.
It kind of cock-blocked Superstar by the Carpenters for 2 of those weeks. And it was number one on the UK singles chart, also for 5 weeks. Topped the charts in Australia and Canada. And it was the number 2 song from 1971 on both the Billboard Hot 100 chart and the UK singles chart. That's how big Maggie May became.
That's exactly right, and this is what turbocharged his solo career. I mean, from this point, he was able then to really see the faces, see that period was in the rearview mirror, and it was onward and upward. I mean, really was a huge force in the 70s. I mean, he really was just a dominant presence on both sides of the Atlantic in the 1970s, and he very much kind of mirrored the times. I mean, he aggressively went down the disco route, and with some success. I mean, candidly, with some success. Yes. And so you can imagine a scenario where Rod Stewart would become a star without Maggie May. But boy, it really helped. It really helped.
It was a shot in the arm, that's for sure.
No question.
They recorded that in 2 takes. One session, 2 takes, and it was done. It was in the box.
Well, doesn't it have that kind of feel? I mean, doesn't it have that kind of
spontaneous?
Again, spontaneous, kind of earthy. I mean, it just has this. Yeah, there's a certain kind of life to it, a certain kind of spark to it that it doesn't feel over rehearsed. It doesn't feel overproduced. There's a kind of magic to it, which I guess makes the song timeless.
The cymbals had to be overdubbed because when Mickey Waller came in, there was a drum set waiting for him, but a drum set without cymbals.
Well, listen, things happen.
Things happen. It's a very strange thing to happen.
This seems, that's really strange.
How do you put together a drum set in a studio and leave the cymbals off? It is strange. But let's talk for just a second about the title, Maggie May.
It's
yes.
Well, yes. I mean, once again, those lads from Liverpool have an influence, and so everywhere you turn, there is some sort of Beatles influence or Beatles reference, and this is no exception.
Well, and the song Maggie May, Liverpudlian sailor jaunty is much older. It's about a prostitute in Liverpool who ended up rolling a sailor who had just got back from a long voyage. So she was a prostitute and a thief, ended up getting sent to Australia as punishment. But the Beatles actually recorded a segment of that song, which is on the Let It Be album, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably where Rod Stewart first heard it. Although there were some earlier versions of it in pop.
That's right.
In the 50s as well, but
at the very least, there does seem to be. I mean, there does seem to be a kind of connection. But I mean, once again, there you go. I mean, the Beatles, they're in their way kind of
They're
everywhere.
everywhere. They're everywhere.
Indeed. So there we have it, I think, right?
Yeah.
This amazing song. Some people would say amazing set of songs from Rod
I would say
Stewart.
an amazing. I really like both of them. I mean, Maggie May is clearly the favorite, but I really like Reason to Believe too, and
Very
I
good.
just think that this is a very, very strong single.
Well, with that, we again would welcome your comments and your suggestions
Yes.
for a possible single that we will examine. And well, so I think that'll be about it on this time around. So
Yeah.
don't forget that we tweet each day on Twitter X or whatever we call it now. Stephen Dave's one. So we'll see you on Twitter and hope
And
to see you
if
soon.
you liked this episode, and we hope you did, give us a thumbs up. You can subscribe to the station right here. You can listen to our first episode right up here. And the playlist is short this time around, but it's a good one. So
It's a
check
good
that
one.
out right here.
Definitely. All right. Well, until next time, we'll see you soon.
Toodaloo.